Hi, everyone. Welcome to the College to Calling Summit. My name is Miko Lau. The purpose why I gathered together 20 plus experts to be on this summit is because when I just graduated from UC Berkeley 2 years ago, I wish I had the guidance, the inspiration, and the empowerment from others on how I can create the best life after coming out of college. And today, I'm really honored to have a very special guest here with us. His name is Dave Ursillo. Dave is an author, writer, coach to creatives and teachers of self-expression. And as a 15-year-old high school student in the wake of September 11, Dave actually felt called to pursue a career path in leadership and public service with the goal of being a part of positive change in the world. But after getting into the White House as an intern, Dave actually felt depressed and experienced a crisis of identity without a true sense of purpose and meaning in his work. So Dave decided to quit his job in 2009 and started a blog to honor his dreams of really sharing his words to help people with goodness and meaning starting today, not someday in the future. And now Dave is an 11-time author with his work featured in places all everywhere, including Psychology Today, CBS News, and so many more. So Dave, so excited to have you on here to share about your story and your insights and really the amazing work that you're doing today.
Thank you, Miko. I'm happy to be here, happy to tell my story and share it and hopefully also share in ways that help you who's watching and presumably in college or recent college grad and trying to figure out direction, trying to figure out really big things, like big solving for big dilemmas or answering big questions. I lived those myself, and so I hope that I can give you something that would be helpful for you in your journey too.
Yeah, absolutely. You are definitely a person who has walked the path and really, especially for a lot of people who just came off college, we all have these ambitions, these aspirations to become a positive change in the world. And we do all these internships only to find out that some of the work that we do may not be in true alignment with who we are. So I'm really excited to talk about that, your story, to really ask you questions about that. So why don't you take us back in time, really going back to age 15? That's a really young age. How was that experience? How did that shape you into giving you the clarity that you know you want to go into leadership and public service?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, Miko. So when I was 15 years old, as you mentioned in my introduction, thank you. Coming into adulthood, right? So 15 is a stage in life where I think we're really starting to look for a sense of identity and really trying to formulate who we think we are for the first time. And so it was at this pivotal stage in my life when I was in high school that something very traumatic happened at a regional level, at a national level, to some extent throughout the world. It was really kind of like a historic changing moment for how history itself would be changing and everything that's happened as a result, from economies shifting to wars happening and very, very big things. But on a very individual and personal level, my own experience of that was kind of like seeing what I thought was the whole world crumbling down around me. Now, I was watching September 11th, not from like live and in person, like a lot of people in the tri-state area would have, including friends of mine from college who were there in the city when it happened, but from my high school library, and it's grainy TV with like the old like rabbit ears. And at that time, I kind of said to myself, this is like the worst thing that I can imagine happening. And so what I wanted to do from that point forward was to make a change in some way, like to direct my life in such a way that I could possibly help the world and make a better mark on it than the sadness and the trauma and the hurt and the pain and the suffering that I was, watching in real time. So it felt like a very instinctive moment where I felt like, if I can do something to help this world, then it feels like it really needs it right now. And I had no idea what that could have meant at the time. I just thought it was when I was also 15, I was starting to get into like student government. And so I thought doing something in government, in politics, in like public service would be a way to affect change positively. And that's where my I guess my career trajectory began.
Wow. And then after college, you actually got an internship in the White House, right? How was that
Yeah.
like for you?
Oh, it was amazing. I mean, that was definitely the highlight of like my young career, the first
Hmm.
stage of my career. So when from age 15 on to being 23, I worked and interned in about 6 or 7 different offices on like a state level and a federal level, including
Hmm.
this great experience at the White House. I was an intern at an office called the Council on Environmental Quality, and this is an office of the White House that houses the advisors of the president on all matters environmental. And so
Hmm.
I would, commute down to the White House. Our office was right next to the White House, and had a fantastic experience. It was really great, and really, I learned a lot, and the people that I worked with were phenomenal. I actually just went to a White House reunion party with my old office a few months ago, and 11 years later, got to reconnect with people who I didn't even think would remember me, but did, and had like a really great time. So the White House experience was terrific. It was really interesting point in time because, and this is something that affects my generation. I'm 33 going on 34, which may be a little bit different for 22 and 23-year-olds. But when I just graduated college is when the so-called Great Recession happened. So that the housing crisis, the banking crisis, and everything kicked in the summer after I graduated. And so for us, it also became really difficult thereafter to get hired. So that was like another wrench that got thrown into the machinery that was figuring out my career after I graduated college, because there were hiring freezes. It was another instance where I kind of felt like the whole world was crumbling down around us, and nobody knew how bad the recession would be. And tens of thousands of people were losing their homes, and this is when like Ponzi schemes were being found out, and Bernie Madoff was happening, I think, around then. And so it's just like I just feel like I didn't really recognize it at the time, but as I look back now, there are quite a few chapters that felt particularly like difficult and strenuous and stressful, that were influencing things like, again, like September 11th, big picture level, like historic macrocosm level. But they were also having an influence on me and the decisions that like a lot of my friends from college were making about their careers. It was a scary time. And so I think it was really, a lot of people wanted to go a conservative route and try to just like desperately hang on to any job or internship or opportunity that came their way, because you didn't really know if there would be another one, if it would be years later that you would get another job offer. So it was a very, so that was all happening as I was working at the White House, or it was really starting to happen around that time. Otherwise, the experience of working with the people I was working with was fantastic. And it actually gave me a lot of hope that maybe I could find a career path in politics and in public service for the first time, because I didn't have very inspiring experiences in other offices before that. It was all very kind of like cynical, and it was kind of making me jaded. But the experience I had at the White House was actually like a little glimmer of hope. And then the economy happened and everything happened, and I was like, well, what am I going to do here? I'm not really sure what I have to offer as a 22-year-old at the time who never really had like much by way of jobs or work experience other than internships. So what do I do next? And that was a question that really hounded me for quite a while.
Well, I feel like what you experience really resonate with a lot of my friends, people our age, especially because I graduated from UC Berkeley, and we tend to be a little bit way too ambitious in terms of like looking for the internships and jobs once we finish college.
Mm-hmm.
Really getting an internship at the White House is so impressive and it's such an achievement. But you said that you experienced a depression and a crisis of identity. So how did that really start to happen? Like what exactly was the source behind that sense of unfulfillment, even though on the outside for so many people it seems like the ultimate success or really amazing achievement after graduating from college?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'll say, Miko, for me, that I had a very similar experience, it sounds like, to you, because I went to an East Coast liberal arts school. I went to the College of the Holy Cross. And so we were part of kind of like a a consortium of schools where the expectation was when you graduated that you would not only like have an internship, but have like a job, and that you would be working in finance, or you'd be going to law school, or you'd be going into the upper echelon of career, like the top whatever 10% of careers that are out there. So the stakes were very high, and the expectations were really high. And so there's a little bit of a feeling of, I wouldn't say that there was a sense of like real competition with my classmates or my friends, but there was that pressure, right? As that pressure of our whole lives, for my generation and a little bit younger, I think was the start of when there was an expectation, like from being born almost through the age of 22, you were constantly in school, right? For those of us who were lucky enough and privileged enough to go through this kind of Western system of education. And so it was all leading up to getting to that place where you graduate from college, and then what? And then it was expected that you'd like take off and change the world and start making all this money and paying off loans. And it's a lot of pressure. And it's a lot of pressure that I think misleads young people into the expectation that you have to have it all figured out by the time you graduate, or you have to figure it out soon. You have to figure it out within a year or 2 years. And if you don't, then you're falling behind. And I don't know if this experience is similar to what you experienced, Miko, but it was like around when I was like 24, so a couple of years after graduating college, where I started to see a lot of my friends from college start to go back to grad school. And a lot of them used it as a stepping stone to get to their ideal career. But a lot of, I did notice other people using it almost as a delay tactic to say, like, I don't know what I want to do with my life, so I'm going to go back to grad school. And I'm not, I don't think that that's a bad thing, but I think it is indicative of the pressure that we feel to figure it all out by your mid-20s. It feels like you're late or behind. But to answer your question, my experience with depression and like a crisis of identity, as I call it in my bio, are part of, I wouldn't say that like depression is a part of my personality, but how much I cared for the purpose that I have in my life, how much I've cared for making an impact of some kind, how much I've cared for wanting my life to feel meaningful and to do something, to contribute with my life in a way that feels in some way, shape, or form significant, is something that's followed me around since I was a kid. And that calling, that impulse, the desire expressed itself as depression when things in my life didn't seem to be in alignment, when things in my life didn't seem to be congruent with that desire. And I've gone on to really believe that feelings and emotional responses are data points. They're feedback. They're like a system that our bodies have to give us more understanding and information about what is going on in our lives, and how we're perceiving the conditions of our lives. So for me, what I would go on to discover or compute, if you will, about my depression and crisis of identity was that I was feeling unfulfilled and like there was more for me, and that if I compromised on seeking more purpose and more fulfillment, that I would feel like my spark or my fire or my passion was burning out or diminishing. So when I quit my job, it wasn't really so much about ever wanting to like work for myself. I didn't really have ambitions to be like a rich entrepreneur, and I didn't even really care about like being my own boss at the time. It was just, especially when I was dealing with depression, it was kind of like me trying to survive first and foremost. And I also make sure that I tell people, Miko, about when I tell my story about quitting my job, that it wasn't as simple as I quit my job and I immediately like was making enough to support myself and like pay for a family and pay for the mortgage. Like I was 23 years old at the time. I was living in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house. I didn't have a dog or a girlfriend or a goldfish to take care of. So I didn't have any student loan debt. Like I had the best possible circumstances. So the story of me quitting my job and like starting this thing is like, it sounds like an amazing like hero story. Really, I was just like, I'm depressed. I feel like, can I swear?
That's okay.
Okay. Sorry. I was just going to say, like, I'm depressed. I feel like shit. I don't want to do this anymore. I felt like the life was being drained out of me with what I was doing after my White House internship. And so I made what was ultimately a very logical choice to try to take care of myself first and foremost and give myself time to figure out what I wanted to do next. And so my depression and crisis of identity were great gifts in a way. Like I never want to feel them again, but I think I'll never forget how those feelings feel and how those experiences feel, because it's not like, I don't feel like I was a victim. I feel like they were opportunities for me to be more true and to find the bravery, if you will, to actually say, like, I need to find something else to do with my life. And I thought to myself that I could do something with writing because I felt like I was a pretty good writer from going to great schools and learning how to be a persuasive writer academically. And writing had always been a small passion of mine in my teenage years. And so I thought that I might be able to do something more significant with writing starting now, and then maybe I could build something for myself. Maybe I could become an author and at least feel like I was contributing something to the world, rather than what I was being told and what I felt in politics and public service all the time was like, you have to wait your turn. You have to prove yourself. And maybe I do have a little touch of like arrogance in the like defiant sense in me. Since I was young, I always like defy authority for no good reason. But I just hated that. I hated that idea that I had to like wait 5 or 10 or 15 years to like be like good enough to say like, hey, here's how you might seek your own path of personal wellness, or here's how I dealt with depression. Maybe you can do it too. I believe that we are all leaders by example of what we have learned ourselves. So anything we've learned personally, we become a teacher of that. Whether it's getting through a bad breakup, whether it's dealing with depression like I did, or whether it's how you cope with an event in your life, you might discount the fact that that is something that makes you a teacher or a leader. But if you think to somebody who has never gotten that advice, if you think to somebody who's dealing with it right now, so me sitting here in this position talking to you, Miko, and to the other participants in the summit, the only thing that really qualifies me to give you advice is the fact that I know what you're going through. And it's not about the credentials, and it's not about how many readers I have or how many books I've published. It's like, I have been in your position. Here's what I did. Mm-hmm. If that at least helps you feel less alone in your experience, then that will help you. And if you can take some advice that I have, that I tried myself, and it works for you, or you take it and make it your own, then that's all it takes to be a true leader, is just to try to open yourself up vulnerably and to offer some advice to someone who may be in need of it. So I say all that to say, we become teachers of whatever we've learned. And in this sense, we're all in position to start offering some goodness to the world today, and not feeling like we have to wait for it until like we're good enough or qualified enough.
Wow, I love that so much, Dave. That is very different from what we've been taught and conditioned to believe growing up. Very, very different. Like I know this because when I just graduated from college too, I also felt lost and confused, and I didn't know how I think deep down all of us have this calling to make a difference on this planet, to be a positive change, but we don't know how. And I feel like when we go through college, we have these very limited ways to really make a difference, like be a doctor, go into law school. But yet, when I knew that at the moment, none of those career paths really fit me, who I was, and the way that I want to impact the world, Miko Lau way. Well, there was just no way out there that just fit me inside that box. So I knew that I had to impact and do something creative as who I am. But a lot of times it was very abstract. I didn't know how. I didn't know how to create some sort of ways to monetize my gifts and my skill set. So for you, when you really decide to quit your job and pursue your writing, how was that like for you? Because how do we even start to begin with, right? It's very abstract, intangible. How do you recommend someone to really get to know, like to even begin the first step towards that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, Miko, because what I hear you saying and what you were describing your own experience is the process by which we as young people oftentimes are encouraged to focus is on who we will become in career. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you know, our shared generation of Gen Yers, of millennials, implicitly recognize that it's not everything, that it's also oftentimes doesn't feel enough, because we know that we have, you know, despite having so many amazing opportunities in career and like so much freedom to be able to choose our direction, it's almost like having so many choices is just as daunting on an individual level as having no choice at all. And I think you see this in our consumer culture, in our society, where people are just feeling constantly overwhelmed by the number of choices before them. And so when it comes to like career path, you can pick based on, you know, what your parents expect of you, or what is socially esteemed and valuable, or what will make you the most money to pay back your loans. And that's all fine. But I know for me and how I'm hardwired, that what became of paramount importance was for me to know who I really was and then let the career path follow. Not to pick a career path and hope that I would eventually find out who I really am and what I find meaningful and fulfilling. Now, it's an extreme privilege to be able to be in that position, and I don't take it for granted. But I know that by the time that I graduated college, I still didn't really know the truth of who I felt myself to be. And so what I ended up doing when I quit my job and I was dealing with depression and my crisis of identity was, you know, I started my blog, like you said in my bio. I started to write, and I just kind of like was trying to find my direction by doing rather than like thinking. I just thought, like, I just got to start in one direction and go and see what happens. But what I was doing offline and personally was engaging in what I now teach and help and try to help others to do for themselves, which is to use a personal journal, so a personal medium for self-reflection, to develop self-knowledge, to really use the pieces of paper in a journal to reflect on the qualities of what makes us who we are and what we believe and what has influenced us. So I sat for hours and days and weeks after I quit my job, just writing and saying, okay, this is who I think I am, and this is what I think my generation is all about, and this is how this event influenced me. I really just did this full download in an inventory, right? Like a process of writing and creating an inventory of trying to figure out who I felt I really was, and not who I felt like other people were trying to make me. And that was the start of practices that I continue to this day, of ongoing self-knowledge and self-reflection. And I don't believe we ever fully know the truth of who we are, but it is an ongoing conversation. And I believe in making space and showing up and just looking yourself again in that proverbial mirror that is a blank page, and having a conversation with yourself and asking yourself how you're feeling. There's, it's said that we have anywhere from like 10,000 to 50,000, I can't remember the exact number, thoughts in a day. And when you think about that, think about how many thoughts we have, you realize that our mind, a condition of the human, or I should say the human condition, involves having an overwhelming number of thoughts, and that thoughts can sometimes feel like they take advantage of us, or the truth of who we are and how we feel. And by curating thoughts and being deliberate and slow and patient in how you select your words and tell your story on a piece of paper, I found it to be almost like a sieve, right? Like when you go to the beach and you sieve out the dirt and the small pebbles and things, and you find like those big gems, or like the figurative big gems of like thoughts and awareness. And that's how I started really believing in writing as a medium for personal wellness, of mental health, and also just like an ongoing practice in knowing yourself and letting that be the starting point every day, every week, every month, every year for doing whatever you feel like you do next in career or otherwise. So for me, it defaulted back into writing, but not writing necessarily to perform, not writing just to blog, right? Like I was writing for myself while I was also developing the blog on the side, and writing for myself, this ongoing self-knowledge work. It's slow, but it's meant to be slow, because it's the stuff that informs us of the truth of who we are beyond our skin, name, and like the superficial identity. So knowing what makes you tick, knowing even beyond your personality, what drives you, what motivates you, what feelings do you want to feel every day that would make you feel fulfilled enough to work hard and be stressed, or deal with hardship. This is the stuff that I really try to teach my clients, even if they're not professional writers or aspiring authors. I try to teach all of my coaching clients, all my readers, to use a self-reflection mechanism like a personal journal to tap in to the truth of who they are, and just to sit with themselves and let that be like an active meditation, to inform whatever may come next. That's how I got started, and I haven't really looked back since.
Yeah, and I think it's needed, especially in today's society. I think you mentioned this too in your work, that there's so much distraction out there and so much noise going on right now that we don't really have an opportunity to just pause and really get to know ourselves. And then we go everywhere outside of us to seek fulfillment, success, and happiness, only to realize that that's never going to work. So let me ask you this: when you really make this transition, quitting something that is very physical, tangible, in your hands kind of career path, to following something that not many people can see where it can go, or even including yourself, you may not know where exactly it's going to head down towards. How was that like in terms of like, did you have friends, families tell you like, Dave, what are you doing? Are you crazy? Or even like fighting that internal doubts and questioning, like how did you keep staying on this path despite the challenges, the fears, the doubts that came up?
Yeah, it was really hard, Miko. I had support from my parents, which was important, but I don't think that they really understood what I was doing. They just kind of like they gave me trust, but they didn't really understand. And I think that it was difficult, and I understand why it was difficult, because I didn't really know what I was trying to do either. So trying to communicate that to them was really challenging. I'll actually tell you that when I was about to quit my job, this is a funny story that I don't know if I've told before publicly, but when I was about to quit my job, I consider myself to be a writer. Writing was the way that I kind of found, I always struggled when I was younger I felt like I struggled to communicate verbally and out loud. I felt like when I was trying to explain myself that I couldn't really find the words or the stories to articulate how I was feeling about a situation. I felt oftentimes confronted by people when I was trying to be verbal, and they wouldn't get it, and it would really frustrate me, and I would be very kind of like closed off as a result. So writing helped me find my voice. And I say all that to say that when I was about to quit my job, I still didn't really consider myself to be much of a writer or communicator or storyteller. But I wanted to demonstrate to my parents what I was trying to do. So I created a PowerPoint presentation for them, and I didn't like broadcast it. It would just like show that to them on the computer. But I was trying to like articulate how I saw a vision for what I was starting with, like a blog, could become. At the time, I was thinking in the direction of like a nonprofit idea or some sort of like a charitable mission idea, and then my blog, which could evolve into some kind of work that would be paid for, whether it be consulting or coaching or publishing a book and developing a platform. Now, this was 11 years ago, so there wasn't like, the 100 million different resources on like how to use a blog or the internet to start a business. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I had no resources, I had the internet, but I didn't have any contacts or examples in 2008, 2009, where I understood that this was possible. I just kind of like, I sensed that it was a possibility. So I put together a PowerPoint presentation, showed it to my parents. They were like, I guess we get what you're going for. Like, okay, if you think you need to quit your job, then like, we'll support you as best we can. And I was like, all right, well, and then a couple of weeks later I quit. So that was part A, but I think it actually got harder as the years went on, Miko, because it wasn't like anything near overnight success. I think like people talk about like how it can take small businesses in America. There's statistics that say that a lot of small businesses don't show a profit for the first 18 months to 2 years. There's statistics that say that, I can't remember what percentage, I think 50% of all small businesses can fail within like 5 years or 3 years. It's something like that. It's just basically that the going from zero to monetized, like profitable, is really hard for small businesses that presumably have like a model to follow of offering products and services that there's a market for. And so I was trying to do something where I didn't know what I was offering. I didn't know what I was valuable, like what I had to offer that was valuable. So it was a very slow learning process. And I actually found it really alienating for the first few years. I would say probably for the first 2 and 3 years, it was extremely alienating, especially amongst my friends. My friends were all supportive in their own way, but it was kind of like I felt like I was the butt of the ongoing joke of like, I didn't have a job, and like, we don't know what Dave does all day. He just like sits on the computer all day. And that was hard, right? That was challenging. And when people around you, they do have your best interest in heart, they want you to succeed, but they're also like, but I also don't really get what you're doing. I found it really hard to relate to anybody because, when you're 25, 26, like some of the only identity that people still have in their 20s, at least where I was living at the time, was through their work and through like their coworkers were their social connections. And so I didn't have that. And then when I would socialize with them, I constantly felt like an outcast. So it was really frustrating. It was really difficult until I finally found a network, a connection into other people who were seeming to do what I was doing. And that was like a godsend. At the time, so when I was about 25 or 26, I was trying to get a book deal for the first time. And a really kind, really sweet literary agent liked me, liked my work enough, but she said, I don't think you're there yet. I don't think you're ready, but your vibe kind of reminds me of this one writer in particular. So like check him out and like maybe you'll be able to follow his path. And so that led me into connecting with bloggers and authors and entrepreneurs and creative people, some of whom are still friends of mine that I talk with, once a year, and I follow them, and we kind of all keep tabs on each other, what people who are still running their businesses and coaching and authoring books and things. So that was a godsend. So finding peers who understood what I was trying to do, even though they were in California, New York City, or spread all over the world, I found community that way. And that just made me feel like I wasn't crazy, that there was a possibility of making this work. And it really kind of brought me, it's finding those people pushed me to keep going, and also made me feel finally like accepted, that I wasn't just making something up, and that I wasn't maybe completely crazy.
Oh, so it's all about connection and really leveraging other people's beliefs and yourself and your vision. It's so powerful. I feel like I'm on the same exact path as you, and I'm so glad that you really emphasize. I think this is something a lot of people are missing today, that there's no instant success. It's always going to take multiple journeys and years of really building that foundation. So I want to ask you, Dave, this question. I feel like your previous career path compared to what you're doing right now, it's a complete shift in terms of how you make an impact, right? Back in the days, you feel like you had to go into the political field to go into that direction in order to make a change. But now it's completely different. So like, what is your concept? Like, how do we make a difference in this world today?
It's a great question. I actually find that on the surface, there's a big difference between what I thought I would do in my career and what I'm doing now. People will ask me still to this day, like, when the subject comes up, like, what did you study in college? Because it's an interesting part of our story. What we chose to study in our young adult years can reveal what we thought was going to be the focus of our lives or what our interests were at the time. And I say political science, and they go like, how do you end up doing what you're doing now from political science? And I'm like, yeah, it's a big jump studying politics and in history in a lot of ways to being now a writer, an author. I call myself a creative advocate. So like helping to support people's creative self-expression. I coach, I copyright, I help people tell their stories. How are those two things related? I actually see a lot of similarities now when I think back on it, because the study of politics and history is the study of people and what motivates people and what moves individuals and groups of people. It's a human science, right, of understanding the mind and understanding what drives people's behaviors and wants and dreams. And so all of the work that I do today, whether I'm writing a newsletter about how to change the story of one of my big things is like encouraging people to stop using the word busy to describe their schedules and just try to find a different way to tell a story. Like really describe it. Don't just use a term like busy to say like to replace what else you've been experiencing in your life. Like find a different way to describe like my plate has been so full lately, or I really need to be asking for help because I've bitten off more than I can chew, or just finding a different way to describe an experience. Whether I'm doing something like that, or I'm coaching a writer who's writing their first book, or I'm helping a senior level executive rewrite their cover letter for a new job that they're going for. The things that I'm talking about with them, no matter what, has to do with how are they feeling, who are they, and what do they want? It's all behavior stuff. It's all self-knowledge work. And so I act myself and through the work that I do as an intermediary to help people to express their self-knowledge, to express who they are, whether it's in writing, on stage, or in a book. And when I think about politics and history, that's really what is the content of what moves whole countries and moves world history. It's people trying to understand what motivates other people. So I consider myself to be like an examiner of behavioral change and understanding the mind and also emotions. And those are all things that are really important to me. And so when I see a lot of connections now between politics and what I do as a writer. And as I move forward in my career, I think that I find myself more often than not looking back at what I studied and how people's behaviors are changed through themselves and through their work. And that's something that oftentimes comes up. So it's like, you may never know how what you've studied is connected to what you do next. But you can trust, there's a saying, because I'm a former yoga teacher too, there's a saying that I oftentimes told my students. It comes from an ancient Indian text called the Bhagavad Gita, and it says something to the effect of, on the path of yoga, or on the path of seeking wholeness, so like a spiritual outlook of trying to find wholeness within yourself. When you're on that path, no effort that you've made in the past is wasted. It all comes with you. So all the learning you've done comes with you. It doesn't matter how many twists and turns there are, how many times you change directions. It's not like you're starting over from scratch. It all comes with you because it's in you. And so that's how I look at things. I try to take a holistic look, a holistic approach where everything I've done in the past comes with me. And even if I wake up tomorrow and decide I'm not going to be a writer anymore, I'm going to do this, that everything that I've done will still come with me. It'll look different from the outside, but it's still me. And so it's important to remember, take that like abundant approach and remember that the efforts that you've made are not going to be wasted, that they will come with you no matter what you decide.
Yeah, I agree with that so much, because even like doing reflection, looking back in my life, all the experiences that add up to today, I feel like everything that we do is somehow still in alignment with who we truly are. We might not know it exactly, or we might not see how it is related, but there's always that small alignment in terms of every decisions that we made in our lifetime. So Dave, I could talk to you all day. This is so great. But in honor of your time, just to wrap up this interview, I have 2 more questions to ask you. And so I know that you really believe in really leading and becoming an example of change, really from inside out, not outside in. And I'm a huge believer of that as well. I feel like instead of seeking external success, external events to fill us up, it's about really getting to know ourselves and really embracing that and letting that flow out and be a positive change to other people. So can you touch more on that? Like, how exactly do we put that into practical application into our lives?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, Miko. I think part 1 is recognizing what I was saying earlier, and I don't want to repeat myself, but when you recognize that wherever you have gone, whatever you've learned in your life, you literally become, you literally have advice that's worth listening to when you think of somebody else that has not been given that advice before. So we oftentimes assume that whatever we've learned, we discredit it. We think that someone else has said it better. Someone else is a better example to follow. So who am I? Who is Dave to give advice on how to write a book? Like my bio sounds great. I've been published in 11 different books. I've self-published 5, I've been published in 6 others. To someone that's never published a book, they're like, that's so much. But I'm sitting here and I think like, well, I'm not a bestseller. I've never done it. I haven't had sold tens or hundreds of thousands of copies. So when we're too close to our own experience, we tend to discount the value. But what I oftentimes encourage someone to do, and this may be a good exercise for reflection for you, Miko, and for participants on the summit, a really simple exercise is to think about what advice you would give to yourself 5 years ago, that your 5 year younger or 5 years in the past version of yourself needs to hear. What would you say? It might be about not getting into that relationship in college that you were in. It might be about actually picking a different path of your studies. It may just be giving them a reminder, being like, you're figuring it out, like you'll be fine, like trust yourself. Whatever advice you might give to your younger self is exactly the advice that you can give to someone like your younger self who hasn't been given that advice before. So if you just take a moment, give yourself credit for what you've experienced and know that it's valuable, because to someone who's never been given that advice or that mentorship or that aid, that support, it means the world. And so I constantly remind myself, what would I say to myself X number of years ago? What would I say to a friend of mine X number of years ago? So just kind of like take that backwards looking focus and say it today. Say it today to someone who might find it valuable, not because you want to be right about it, but because you think it might actually help them or encourage them or help them feel seen and witnessed and understood. If you can remove confusion in some way from someone's life, if you can just give them understanding, that's usually enough to help them feel less panicked, less anxious. And that's how clarity develops, is from, taking an abundant mindset and trying to mitigate the stressors that cloud our judgment. So that's what I would say. That's how you start leading. What I say, leading without followers. Don't worry about the people following you. Don't worry about how much money you have. Don't worry about your status. Don't worry about your label. Actually challenge yourself to lead without followers. So what would you do to be a leader within yourself? And I think looking back on a younger version of yourself or giving advice to someone who hasn't been helped in the way where you once were, in a position you once were, is a great way to start. It's as simple as that. Just kind of trusting yourself and trying.
Oh, that is so good. And I think there's a saying I heard before that as long as we are even one step ahead of someone, we have some value to give and really can give a hand to that person and really bring them forward with this. And every life experiences that we have overcame is definitely something we can offer to someone else who may need that. But definitely it requires a certain level of awareness, self-awareness, to really understand what that value, what that lesson is that we can offer to others. So that's great. I'm definitely going to do that exercise because I could use that as well. Awesome. So last question, Dave. So for our listeners listening right now, if they're in that position, like we mentioned at the beginning of this interview, if they feel like I resonate with this too. I know lots of my friends who are sitting in this position where they decide they have to go back to grad school because they just don't know what to do. And they feel like that's a stepping stone for them. But if they're in that position right now, they're thinking like, what do I do next? Like, do I just travel to another country? Whatever it is, they may feel lost and confused. What would you say to them right now today? And what steps they can take starting today to really get some clarity?
Yeah, it's a great question, Miko. And there's no one right answer, right? So I never tell somebody to not go to grad school or to not travel to another country. I would say it oftentimes feels easier to make a big commitment that feels demonstrative and final and total, like quitting your job or going to grad school or, selling, leaving your apartment and traveling around the world for 100 days. These like big demonstrative things can feel easier, even though they're scarier. They can feel easier because you feel like if I just do this, then maybe I'll figure it all out. And that's tempting. It's tempting to think, it's almost like I would equate it to, if you're someone who's always sees yourself like wanting to be in a perfect relationship, in a romantic relationship, and you meet someone you think that they're great, or like you're trying to get away from being single and you try to make this a big demonstrative like a big demonstrative thing out of meeting them or out of your relationship, and maybe the timing's not right. It's not just about the big grandiose effort. It has to be integrated, it has to be aligned, the timing has to be right. So if the timing isn't right, don't like get on your knee and propose on the third date. If the timing isn't right, don't just quit your job and go to grad school. I wouldn't even say that you need to necessarily quit your job at all. You can start to do research, you can start to plan, and you can start to like really get honest and spend time with yourself. So I'd say before you even like take off and take a trip around the world, try to limit your Netflix and Instagram and the distracting things that consume our attention span every day, and start to spend more time with yourself. Start to spend more time in quiet. Start to meditate. Start to journal a little bit, like 15 minutes a day, 4 days a week is what I usually recommend, because that's more than half of the days of the week that you're reflecting and tuning into yourself and asking yourself what's going on and who am I. I think that those efforts in a few weeks or a couple of months may give you more significant insight, just as if you were going on, spending more time with a significant other over a number of months versus like trying to get married and see if like that fixes everything, from the start. So spending more time with yourself can feel insignificant, but it's going to provide you with the insights and the data and the feedback and the awareness that will last you a lifetime. Whereas, taking out $100,000 in student loans it may be something that you regret in 10 years or 15 years or longer. Traveling around the world and then putting it all on your credit card may be something that you regret, that doesn't figure it all out. So I would say you have to pick the right path for you, but don't get sucked into making a big demonstrative show of it. Even to admittedly, like I did when I quit my job, it wasn't necessarily the right choice for everybody. It was the right choice for me at the time, but I could have done it differently too. And being patient with that process of the unfolding and reflecting, because I think that's the stuff that's really going to stick with you. And that's ultimately, you have to trust yourself rather than get permission from anyone else that you're on the right path. So if you can trust yourself, you have to ask yourself the right questions and start to answer them, because that's what's going to create that alignment, that symmetry, where you feel fulfilled for how you're showing up every day versus just hoping that you'll figure it out as you go. So look within, start to reflect, start to give yourself more time and space, even in the day-to-day. You'd be surprised. It can feel uncomfortable at first, but you'd be surprised how much you can really enjoy spending time with yourself, because that will be where the insights come from. That's where the true knowledge will start to emerge, rather than just filling our attention span with more consumption that ultimately doesn't serve our souls.
Yeah, and thank you so much for giving us that specific concrete steps we can all take, really just limiting the amount of time we spend on Instagram, Facebook, Netflix. It's the first step that all of us can take starting today to really spend more time with ourselves and get to those bigger picture, bigger clarity. So Dave, this has been so amazing. I learned a lot just by talking to you in this past 45 minutes, and I have no doubt that our listeners have taken away a lot of powerful insights and really just new level awareness to really think about the next step moving forward in their life. So can you tell our listeners, if they would love to continue to stay connected with you, how can they find you online?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me at my online home, daveursillo.com. It's URSILLO.com. You can also find me at unavoidablewriting.com, where I do coaching and I offer resources, including writing prompts. And otherwise, you can find me on Instagram. I do like to pop in and offer up a little nugget or a picture from my life or from travels at Dave Ursillo. And also, Miko, I wanted to offer, like I tend to, that if anybody that's a participant in the summit has a follow-up question or feedback or want me to go into more depth, or they have a more specific or personal question, I always try to make myself available, because I was in your shoes before and there were people who I would reach out to and they would help me. So I always try to pay it forward in that way. So please feel free to email me, hello@daveursillo.com. I will respond to it. It won't take 6 or 9 months. I'll get back to you relatively quickly. So feel free, take me up on it. And I'm not going to tell you the right answer for myself, but I'll try to give you what I hope is helpful as you navigate your path and figure things out. And you're doing a great job. Keep up the good work. Don't be so hard on yourself. This is a great advice for everybody, I think. But give yourself credit, and thank you for caring as much as you do about your life and your career and how you're showing up, because we need more people to care more and not less.
Yeah, and I just want to acknowledge you for a second here, Dave, for being so generous and unconditional in terms of your giving, your wisdom, your time, your expertise to help serve people. And it makes me so happy when I see people truly following the calling and really doing amazing work out there for others by just being who they are. And I really see that in you. And I hope that this interview, this summit is also doing something similar for our listeners out there to really inspire them, spark that fire inside them to go after what is true to who they are as well. So for our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in today. And hopefully you'll come back to our next interview with more amazing speakers such as Dave. And we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.